YouTube, welcome back to Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have my overview slash review slash summary of my thoughts and feelings regarding the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Really quick, I want to mention that today is Stephen King's birthday. His birthday is September 21st, so I would just want to wish him a very happy birthday. The video may be uploaded on the 22nd, depending on how fast my internet is, so if that's the case, then happy belated birthday to the one and only Stephen King. The other thing I want to mention really quick is this is going to be a spoiler-free video. I'm really not going to go in depth on anything. I'm not going to discuss much regarding the plot or anything that could spoil the series for you guys. I really want to make this video to answer two questions. Did I like it? And do I recommend it? So, let's get into it. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the Dark Tower series, this is Stephen King's big fantasy epic. He started writing it in the early 1980s and completed the main portion of the story in 2004. He ended up including another story that came out in 2012, which is The Wind Through the Keyhole. This, I will show you. These are my editions of the Dark Tower series. I own all 8, however, I can't find where The Wind Through the Keyhole is, so I ended up reading it on my Kindle. So for the series, we have The Gunslinger, which is the first one, The Drawing of the Three, which is the second, The Wastelands, which is the third, Wizard and Glass, which is the fourth, Wolves of the Kala, which is the fifth, Song of Susanna, which is the sixth, and The Dark Tower, which is the seventh. And then The Wind Through the Keyhole fits in between stories 4 and 5. Okay, so I binged this series. This is my first time reading through the entire series, and it's a reading goal of mine for 2020 to complete The Dark Tower. I've always wanted to do it. It's been on my TBR for a very long time, and this was the year I'm doing this. And I'm so glad that I did. So I started my binge in July, wrapped up in August. For the most part, I read all of these books almost back to back, threw in a couple thriller books to shake things up a little bit, but for most parts, they were read very close together, and I was just determined to make sure I got through the series, so that way I could, finally say I've read it. And going into it, so I like fantasy, and I love Stephen King. I'm a big Stephen King fangirl, constant reader since middle school, and, I wanted to give the series a shot. Even though the few times I've read The Gunslinger, I liked it but didn't love it. And it was just also tricky for me because I tend not to like really long book series. Most of my favorite series tend to either be between 2 and 5 books long. The longer the series, and especially if they're bigger books, the less likely I'm going to read them because commitment issues, I guess. And so I'd kind of put this off a little bit, even though I want to read everything by Stephen King, even his not great stories, because he's a great author. He's tied for my favorite author with Robert McCammon, but he's got a few duds in there, of course, just like all authors do. And so I'd kind of put this off. I really wish that I had read it sooner, because I really liked it a lot. For my fantasy, I like a unique fantasy. It's one of the reasons why I don't tend to read a whole lot of epic fantasy, like high fantasy, is because there's a period of time where it just, for me, seemed like a lot of the fantasy stories I was reading that were epic or high fantasy felt similar. They had too many of the same tropes, or they had too many worlds that felt the same. So I'd taken a long break from epic or high fantasy for almost 10 years. I just did not want anything to do with it. If I was reading fantasy, which I was, it was going to be Portal or urban or paranormal or horror, dark fantasy, something unique. And for this series, it is definitely unique in its own thing. The world building is fantastic, I would say. It's very complex, so already I can kind of caution you with this series is that it does get to a point where it's pretty complicated. Doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. I really liked it. And I think also, too, there's a lot of room for you to use your imagination and for you to think about things. It's a very meta type of series that references so much. I started keeping a little list of things that it references to. I mean, everything from Arthurian legends to T.S. Eliot with The Wastelands to so many things. Really liked it a lot, and as someone who loves the English language and wants to be an English teacher, and someone who loves literature and just loves the ideas of stories, I liked that. I thought it was great. I don't think it was over the top. I thought it was so much fun. And there are some very interesting references that develop in the latter part of the series that I'm not going to spoil, but I thought they were kind of fun. For the Gunslinger, I definitely think, for me, I still feel this way. The first couple of times I read it, I felt this way as well. It feels like a one long prologue, I would say. You're kind of thrown into this story, and you're learning about the main character, Roland Deschain, and he's a gunslinger. He's the last of his kind. And the gunslingers in this world are pretty much kind of like knights a bit. And the world is really cool. It's a mix of a lot of different things. You have like kind of the Old West mixed with like an apocalyptic wasteland mixed with some medieval Europe magical fantasy type worlds. And yeah, the series is just very cool. So if you are someone who's struggling because you did not like The Gunslinger, try The Drawing of the Three. That's the second book. I think things really start to pick up. There are more characters that are introduced to it and a lot more things that are explained. There still are going to be some things in the books that aren't going to be perfectly 100% explained, so if you're somebody who like needs an answer to every single thing, this series may also be sort of a little tough for you. And it gets kind of weird. Like, I love weird fiction. I like when my stories get kind of bizarre, so it worked for me. But again, this really comes down to a taste thing. It may be a little too out there for some readers, so just kind of know that going into it, that, and it's, you know, it's completely how you feel. Reading is subjective. It's very personal, and what your tastes in things are. So I thought that The Dark Tower worked for what I like in fantasy, and that is just a unique, fresh type of fantasy. Something that is unpredictable, something that I'm reading this and I don't feel like I've read it before, and it just combines so many things into the series. It's a cross-genre. It's so many types of stories. You do have that kind of almost spaghetti western style and like the Old West, but you also have apocalyptic elements and sci-fi elements and definitely multiple types of fantasy, and definitely, you know, Stephen King's a horror author, so he does throw in a little bit of horror and dark elements for sure, and the characters, so many of them go on these big journeys in this character arc, and I love stories that incorporate a journey, like we need to travel somewhere and get to this destination, and, you know, traveling to the Dark Tower, that's the, you know, main focus of the book, but then there are other side quests and other things that are happening, and Roland's a really interesting character as well. Like, you're just following him, and you begin to realize that he's not some tropey, you know, gun-happy, predictable guy. There's a lot more to him, and there's a lot more to every single character that you encounter. And I think that's a strength of the book. So if you like characters, especially well-done characters who don't feel like they're just filling a role in the story, that they're their own people with their own backstories and bring something into the story and the narrative, then this is a good fit. I really liked a lot of the characters and getting their histories and seeing their journey and seeing how they related to Roland and, you know, his main overarching journey to get to the tower. Just super cool. And the imagery was awesome. There's just so much creativity in this series. Just fantastic visuals and descriptions, and I really liked it so much. I will say the pacing and the kind of plot at times varied by book. So some books were stronger than others. Like overall, I would probably rate the series like 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really liked it overall. Some books were 5-star reads, some were 4, and one was like maybe a 3.75-ish, but the more I think about it, the more I'll probably bump it up. And I also want to mention that The Gunslinger, I think, ends up being a slightly stronger book after you've completed the entire series, because you can kind of go back and look and appreciate it a little bit more. That happened to me anyway. But it definitely, is a little uneven at times. And the ending, it took me a while to determine if I liked it or not. I do think the series is more about the journey rather than the destination, but for me, once I thought about it, I actually did kind of like it. It's really going to be polarizing, and I honestly just need to make a spoilery video to cover stuff and kind of give my thoughts about the ending, but you'll see. It'll be interesting, but I do know there have been at least a couple of readers I've talked to who didn't like the ending but still enjoyed their experience reading the Dark Tower series and can still appreciate it even if the ending wasn't what they wanted. I thought it was kind of cool and interesting, and again, I like things that are different and that are unique and unpredictable, and that was this series. So even if some of the books were not as good as others, overall they averaged out to be pretty good and definitely very enjoyable. So do I recommend this series? I do. This has become a new favorite series of mine. It's probably not my #1 favorite series, but it's definitely going to be on the list because I really enjoyed my experience with it quite a bit, especially because I have read most of Stephen King's work before I dived into this series. I think I appreciated it more, which is why, if you haven't read a whole lot of Stephen King yet, I actually suggest holding off on reading the Dark Tower series first. I mean, you can do whatever works for you, and if you really want to read the series without having read his work, you can do it. But I think if you've read a lot of his other work, especially his really well-known books like The Stand, for instance, you'll have a greater appreciation for this series. I was constantly picking up references to other books of his, and it was really cool and so much fun. Really enjoyed myself doing that, and it just made me appreciate just the whole kind of universe of Stephen King's work. I just really liked it. I think he's a very clever man. I think this was just very well plotted out and put together, and he's sneaky with things that he puts in his books, and I really liked it. So that's kind of my suggestion, is to read some of his other work first. And I'm probably going to include which books I think you probably should read before you read the Dark Tower in the spoiler video I'm going to be doing. So I will do that soon. And yeah, so if you're somebody who likes cross-genre stories, books that aren't necessarily horror or sci-fi or anything like that, this will be a good series because it's a lot of different things. It's hard to really classify it as anything except, it really is very heavily fantasy. So that's the biggest genre that you'll find in these books, but it's so much more. There are so many great elements in it. Definitely a very complex and multifaceted story with great characters. It's just a little complicated, so be kind of ready for, especially as it progresses. The earlier books are kind of a little bit more straightforward, and then it does get to be pretty deep and have a lot going on and a little bit more complex than kind of your regular standard fantasy. So be ready for that. You may have to reread chunks of it to understand exactly what's happening, but once you kind of push through, and then at the end you'll realize that it was worth it, I think, anyway. And also, if you like weird stories, just unique take on things, great references, just so much so many things going on in the story, so I definitely recommend giving it a shot, and, you know, I hope that you like it. So that summarizes my review of the Dark Tower series. I kept it intentionally vague because I didn't want to spoil anything for you guys. My goal of this video is to kind of just let you know my basic thoughts and feelings of the series, and to kind of convince you to go give it a shot for those of you who have not read it, because I think there's a lot of creativity and uniqueness behind this series. It's unlike any other book series I've ever read. It's pretty deep at times. It's thought-provoking, references so much, and there's just a lot going on. It's kind of a complex story at times, but I think it's worth reading for sure, and, you know, just further cements my love of Stephen King, pretty much. So anyway, if you're planning on reading this, let me know. If you've already read it, let me know what your thoughts are, and happy birthday to Stephen King again. I hope he had a great birthday, and I hope the man lives to be 120 and keeps on writing books. So anyway, have a great night. Please like, comment, rate, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.